Well, when I came in the fire department, of course, I'd had the privilege and the fortune of being in the volunteer department prior to that. So I had seen firsthand. I'd been on plenty of calls where there was EMS call and plenty EMS operations, and so I had seen what was going on. And in fact, when I was at Texas A&M, I took an EMT course, and we rode with the Houston paramedics here. And that goes back as far as 1978. So I have seen the operation. I can tell you authoritatively back to 1978 as to how it did. And I can tell you that probably the biggest change has been a philosophical one more than anything. And that is that when the department accepted the responsibility of EMS, the members of the department had no option, had no say-so in it. This is going to happen, and you guys are just going to have to buck up and do it. And you had those that were in the department who wanted to do it, who thought, this looks interesting. I think I would like to do this. I'm tired of being out in the middle of a blazing building at 3 in the morning. I'd rather be dealing with a patient at 3 in the morning, because that's exactly what you end up doing. Is you have a lot more calls on EMS obviously than you do in the fire service, but you had members that gravitated toward it, and many stayed for a long time. Some had 3 or 4 years and they'd had enough. Some had 3 or 4 minutes and they'd had enough, and it just varied wildly, literally widely and wildly. But so it had to overcome that, and that is a generational change in the fire department. There are certain things in the fire department that require a long period to adjust, and EMS therefore was perceived by the vast majority of firefighters initially as something thrust upon them, and that we have to do it. And anybody that likes this sort of thing is a weirdo. Or is a bit of an outcast, a stepchild, if you will. Stepchild was the term that was used among firefighters a lot. This is they were just treated like they were the unwelcome visitor. And even though they wore the same uniform, the same badges, and they sat and ate the same meals with them, and had been trained to do the very same job that these guys were doing, but it overcame itself, and it took a long time. That was still quite prevalent when I came in. My first captain, I couldn't wait to drive the ambulance. I thought that was neat. I love the firefighting too, but I wanted to do both. I was that weirdo that wanted to do both. And so my first captain, when I said that I wanted to go to paramedic school, he looked at me like I was a complete nut. He said, "Why do you want to do that?" I said, it's just something I've always wanted to do. And he had been a paramedic himself. And he said, "Well, you'll find out." And he was right. You do find out. I mean, it is not the Johnny and Roy glamour that you had on the TV show Emergency at all times. And if you look at that job that they do on that TV show, yeah, there's a lot of glamour to it, but there's a lot of hard work to it too. And they're up in the middle of the night when the rest of the guys are sleeping. You get thrown up on, you get blood all over you, you get things that are, that you could take home to the missus or whatever, and this is just, not for everybody. But as long as you protect yourself, and if you'll observe, these guys today, they wear glasses and they wear gloves, and they wear everything like that. And the firefighters themselves that may have never been paramedics themselves, they have more or less found out at this point, they've gone through enough generations of this that they know this is not going away. It's here to stay, and this is what they are assistant. And one of the great helps in that was when it actually started with Robert Swartout, who was the chief from Seattle that came down here. And I heard this story told to me by some high-ranking officials. So, and it makes sense, because up in Seattle, they integrated their system early, prior to well before Houston had, meaning that they would send fire trucks with the ambulances on medical calls, and so that there was never this view as a stepchild. I'll get back to that in a second, but whereas Houston at the same time was literally, the first station I worked at, It had a common dormitory. Now, and the only person that got their own dormitory or own room was the captain. Everybody else slept in another room, including the paramedics. And we had an ambulance there with with a paramedic on it, or two, and they slept in a little corner with a little barricade, and they had a red light that stayed on kind of all night, and they were called on the phone. And so a call at 2 in the morning for somebody having chest pains, all the lights in the stations didn't come on. The phone would ring, and then you may or may not hear it, but you'd go right back to sleep, as opposed to the lights all coming on and having to get up groggy and finding out it's not for you, not for the engine company, it's for the ambulance. And this would go on for years. It was like that. And so the paramedics, and they would sit there in their little red light and write the address down and where they were supposed to go and tear the people off and then put their clothes on and head out to the ambulance and not turn that siren on until they were about a half a mile down the road. And that's how it was. That's how it was in the late, all the way from the start till probably, I can't remember the exact date, but there was an order that came out that said, enough of this business of calling on the phone. It causes too much delay, and we're starting to send fire trucks more, so we're just going to hit the station. And it was probably in the late 80s, early 90s, as I recall. But the whole point is it changed the whole focus. And there were several district chiefs, as I remember, who were not happy about it because they got their own room, and the lights are coming on with the speakers blaring at 3 in the morning for the ambulance. Oh, they were fit to be tied in some stations, let me tell you, because they didn't like that at all. And I cannot remember whose watch that was on, to be honest with you. But whoever it was, they faded to heat, and it's still to this day done exactly that way. You have a call, sick call, man down, any kind of routine EMS call, bloop, the whole station. I don't care if that station has 5 fire trucks, and an ambulance. The whole station's going to know about it. And there have been, this is not to get too far afield here, but that has been an issue that has been discussed on a national level because of, what's the best way to alert EMS without, trying not to disturb the firefighters if at all possible. And there have been some stations that have been built, where you could individually notify the rooms, but that's not the case here. The case here is service, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows, because it's really the station captain's responsibility to make sure that the ambulance, that every vehicle there has received their run. And when I was a station captain, I didn't, the lights would come on once for the call. A few minutes later, the lights would come on again. Ambulance such and such, you need to acknowledge your run. Well, that's my cue to go act. Well, why didn't they get it? So I have to get out of bed now and go find out how come they're not responding. And it's typically a case where they're just slow and didn't hit the acknowledgement button in the unit, things like that. But it doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, there's a reason for notifying the entire station, and that's why they do it. But Chief Swartout, back to him, the reason he sticks out in my memory is because I was working at a station that had no ambulance. It had a chief's car, an engine, and a ladder truck back in the early 80s. Or, I take it back, 84, 85 when he was here. That's exactly when he was here. And apparently he just raised at a chief's meeting one morning the question of, how come we don't send the fire trucks with an ambulance crew, to help lift, to help go get equipment if needed, to wash down gasoline if it's a wreck. And some of the other staff chiefs there said, well, they didn't have an answer for that. I mean, it's just, other than to say it's always been done this way. And so they decided that they would implement, and the way I heard it is he didn't actually order it, but whoever was over EMS at the time decided, well, let's implement this and see how it works. So they selected about, 8 or 10 different types of calls that seemed to be serious enough to merit motor vehicle accident, shootings, cardiac arrests. A cardiac arrest always got a first responder if it was known to be a cardiac arrest, and that sort of thing. And so that kind of instituted the first informal means of first responding. First responding is now a capital F, capital R situation, and has been for a number of years, whereas you're sending, whether it be a police unit or fire truck or another type of EMS unit, to assist and to get there first. The whole idea is to be the first to respond to the scene, because we have a limited number, and I've always had a limited number of vehicles out there with the paramedics on them. And so if you have a shortage in a given part of town and it's going to take 10, 15 minutes for a unit to get there with a paramedic, you need to get somebody else there that can at least provide oxygen or do CPR if necessary. So that's where all that came from. And by doing so, you ended up with the ability to integrate your department more toward a mindset of we're all in this together. EMS call is just as vital to the department's service and image as responding to a fire. And I can, even though most guys that join the fire department, join because they like the idea of fighting fires, the traditional ways of doing it, there are many that do come in looking in specifically for the EMS part, and but they kind of meld together much better than they did back in the early 70s when it first started. And it's a good thing for everybody.